This is Katrin with Disability Rights New York. Welcome to our podcast, Empire State of Rights Closed Captioned. We are here to bring you information on the most relevant topics regarding disability rights and advocacy. Today, we welcome Tuthall and Audre Wirtanen. They are care access advocates and the co-creators of Hyp-ACCESS, an organization that works to traverse medical research, care access coordination and advocacy, risk minimizing movement, support techniques, and accessible movement programming. They are here to discuss hypermobility, the history of eugenics and ableism, and navigating society and medicine for our health autonomy. Audre, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having us.
And let's start by introducing yourselves. It's great to have both of you on the panel. So Audre, if you want to start.
Sure. My name is Audre. I use she, her pronouns. I'm one half of Hyp-ACCESS, and I come from a movement and science background, particularly neuroscience. Yeah.
And I'm Elle. My pronouns are they and sometimes she. I'm the other half of Hyp-ACCESS. I started working with hypermobile community over 6 years ago. I have also a background in dance as well as music and lots of different kinds of art. I focus more on the disability sociology end of things, lots of research. We really blend our research together. And really kind of started developing accessibility practices for our specific, very neglected, very common disability. And then Audre came in with the science, and that's how Hyp-ACCESS was born.
And so as we are talking to our audience today about a lot of different terms that they may have not heard before, let's talk about hypermobility. It's something that I know I have heard in passing as just being, it's hypermobility. And it's something that really hasn't been defined. It's kind of tossed around. So let's talk about what that really means and how not just your experience, but how hypermobility itself has inspired you to create Hyp-ACCESS.
Yeah. So hypermobility essentially just means a greater than normal range of motion in joints, 10 degrees, at least 10 degrees greater than normal. What exactly does that mean with joints that are three-dimensional? It gets a little tricky. But hypermobility, oftentimes it is widespread, which means that it's affecting 4 or more joints. And that indicates inherited connective tissue differences. When hypermobility is used, it is generally only identifying the aesthetic of what that looks like in terms of a hypermobile person moving with that greater than normal range of motion. But what it actually means is not just musculoskeletal differences, but also a lot of various forms of system dysfunction, because connective tissues are really some of the main tissues in our bodies.
Yeah, and historically, hypermobility, the aesthetic of it, flexibility, contortionism, ballet, different kinds of dance has been the marker for these disabilities. But really, it's widespread connective tissue differences that lend themselves to all kinds of different extreme experiences within the body. And the medicalization of these experiences, the use of hypermobility as a marker is really what has lent itself to people maybe thinking hypermobility can't be disabling, or it's benign, or it's just being a little bit extra flexible instead of maybe it's connected to your gastrointestinal dysfunction, to your fatigue, to your pain, all these things people experience.
And so in talking to our audience about this, I think about what you said initially, both of you, that, the aesthetics of this and how it looks from the outside, right? And how socially and culturally, we have seen these glorified pictures of people being able to, whether it's a contortionist or whether it's dancing or yoga or something, that there's this almost mystical association with how someone looks, with no context about what's happening inside that person's actual body, their health, and how it's affecting them on a daily basis. And so your work really is uncovering the multi-layers of hypermobility, and not just how it's being viewed and not dealt with socially or medically, but also its long history of exploitation and medical ableism. And I think that's something also that our audience may not be aware of what that even is. Like, what is medical ableism? And let's talk about eugenics and how, the treatment and perception of hypermobility is not just a social and cultural issue from imagery, right? Just from the context of imagery in and of itself. Medical ableism, what is it and how is this affecting your work?
Yeah, well, these things really play into each other. The exploitation we see within body-based fields, arts, gymnastics, whatever, and the history of eugenics, of medical ableism. Those are the reasons behind why this is not considered a disability, how common it is hidden away.
So hypermobility has been documented dating back to
Hippocrates, actually.
Yes, because people were shooting bows and arrows and dislocating their shoulders. So we know that this has been something that's existed for a long time, widespread hypermobility. And people were wowed by it, people who were interested in being entertained by it, kings and queens and courts, and then once we got to eugenics, kind of modern medicine started becoming more established as a system. That's when hypermobility really started becoming medicalized. And what eugenicists were noticing was that there was this inherited aesthetic that was causing some issues, especially in rare types of hypermobile conditions. And they knew that they could track it because they can observe it. And so that's how the field of medical genetics was actually born, is finding single point mutations for the rarer types of hypermobile conditions. The ones that we primarily work with and experience are the more common spectrum, often referred to as hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome or hypermobility spectrum disorders. There are also a lot of diagnoses of exclusion, like fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, that we believe are also in this boat with us. It has to do with connective tissues. But because the geneticists, who are really eugenicists, right? That's where the field of medical genetics came from, especially in the United States. They couldn't find the single gene for the more common type of hypermobility. And because of that, they said, oh, well, this isn't real. This must not be a thing that's really impacting people because we can't find a gene. And therefore, there isn't a mechanism that we can identify to correlate to these experiences, which is how, diagnostics and treatment begin. So do you want to go?
Yeah. So it's a very complex history that really no one knows about. When it comes to medical ableism, I think it's impossible to understand medical ableism without understanding that eugenics is the foundation of modern medicine. All these decisions that were made, the fervor of the research to identify what they considered, I'm using air quotes, defects, and eliminate them. This very anti-disability, racist, colonialist pattern we saw really picking up speed at the turn of the century, this focus on inherited conditions and conditions they perceived as inherited, like poverty, which is systemic oppression. This is what they focused on. And then midpoint of the 20th century, after Nazis made eugenics unpalatable to most people, it was really rebranded as medical genetics. But the research priorities stayed the same. And specifically for hypermobile disabilities, they continued for decades and are still continuing now to try to find genetic factors instead of think about who this affects, demographics, how common it is, what treatments might actually improve quality of life for folks, especially treatments that aren't from this same cure-based disability eradication model. And maybe it's someone using a wheelchair instead of someone going through really painful physical therapy in order for them to be able to walk and then needing spine surgery years later. So like the medical ableism component is the root of our medical system, and the way it impacts hypermobile people today is catastrophic. And that's a lot of what our current work deals with.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to talk more, Audre, about medical ableism today and what this erasure of this disability and eugenic lineage.
And if I can actually interject here, one of the things that's coming to mind is, so, on the one hand, we're talking about how there could possibly be help or assistance with all the things that people are experiencing related to connective tissue and hypermobility issues. On the other hand, we have social and cultural aspect of this that, as you brought up gymnastics and dance, I thought, well, this is also something that has been seen as having a competitive edge, right? So we have these conflicting and competing ideas that on the one hand, there's this cultural and social attitude of this is desirable. This is something that will be a benefit to you in your field of sport or art. And then we have the medical ableist side of it, which is, again, we're not looking internally at the people who are experiencing this, just the aesthetic and the possibility of like competition and edge is these two things are at odds with each other. So as you talk about these things, how do these two competitive ideas, how do they come up against each other in daily life and in your research and in the work that you're doing?
Yeah, this is what we deal with every day. I think it's one of these situations where a lot of the way that medicine and society views disability is very much a binary and things can't exist simultaneously. One of the reasons that people with fluctuating disabilities, maybe aren't as supported as someone who has a disability that is more static because, needs change and maybe institutions aren't available to make changes. But yeah, so there's this, interest in the aesthetic of hypermobility, this kind of idealized wellness, like what is wellness? Oh, it means that I can put my leg up 90 degrees. And that really is something that people strive for and feel that if they cannot attain, that means that they're not as healthy as that person, which is really interesting because widespread hypermobility and connective tissue differences really are systemically disabling in terms of cardiovascular, GI, et cetera, et cetera. So there is the reality that hypermobile people can physically do things that people who are not hypermobile can't do, like the splits, maybe like a fancy gymnastics flip. I don't know what they're called. And at the same time, hypermobility actually disables many more people than those who make those upper echelons of these sports institutions, of the dance world, of other kinds of performance. And because, that is primarily the foundation for aesthetics of bodies in art spaces, the idea that hypermobility is disabling goes up against people's frameworks that are really the foundation for how they view health, wellness, artistic, virtuosic movement. And because it's so common, it's likely as common as 1 in 5 people are on the spectrum in some way. So many people have these experiences and throughout their lives have been told, oh, we don't see the kind of inflammation that we think you would have if you're reporting this much pain, or, that's not what's happening to you. You just need to strengthen. So people start to develop various coping mechanisms. Maybe they're disassociating from certain things. It's inherited. So there's also going to be family dynamics within that and how families, deal with it undiagnosed. So it's kind of a big mix of lots of experiences, lots of hypermobile people who are very ableist because they can do these big things. And at the same time, it might be damaging their tissues. So, there's not a whole lot of space to talk about that piece of the tissue damaging and what that could be, years down the road.
Yeah. I mean, I think focusing on people's individual choices is not as useful as looking at how society views these things. And when you really start thinking about it, it's anti-disability that's guiding those thoughts. People doing things that are considered superhuman, really beyond the limits of what people think is possible for a human body, and really fetishization of those aesthetics and not a consideration for the people who are performing them, especially down the line. What we observe a lot in our work, and a lot of the people we work with were excelling in fields and then completely disappeared from them when those impacts were no longer something that they could push through. So I think a lot, considering hypermobility a disability, which it is, it causes impairments. There are more people who are disabled and hypermobile than there are who are hypermobile and don't identify that way and are doing these really incredible things in these elite spaces. But considering it a disability really challenges the underlying framework of so many different fields, from medicine to the arts to just general social systems. So I think it's certainly a conundrum, and it's often seen as a conflict in our work. But I think it's actually evidence of what's going on. It's evidence that eugenic ethos is embedded in everything in our society. It's evidence that we need to look at disability with more nuance. It's evidence that we need to be focusing on caring for people, no matter what they choose to do with their bodies, in a way that really is informed by anti-ableism and disability justice specifically, which is where our learning framework comes from.
And I think disability justice is really, hitting the nail on the head. I mean, really, you're talking about a paradox, right? From going from the aesthetic of excelling and really outperforming in certain spaces, and then having a hard stop and moving into disability. And how can that be, in the general sense of social and cultural norms, which of course, even saying norms is not really a thing. It's an idea of typicalism. And really, if you've met one person, I wouldn't even say if you've met one person with a disability. If you've met one person, you have met one person. There is an individual experience that everyone has, whether it's with their health, their body, their thought process. We're all individual, an individual imprint. And to think of really where the issue of ableism comes in, we're talking about the social structure of language and the medical system that needs to really participate in that. And that really brings me to our next our next topic. And where are we today? When we talk about our medical neglect issues, and really this is medical neglect, how are we able to navigate this? How are you and Hyp-ACCESS helping to navigate this? And we're talking about access for quality of life, treatment landscapes. Where are we and what do we need to do to get better? The research that you're doing is one thing, right? And then we have, how are we really rolling that out into the world, and how do we help that grow and the awareness grow? So I know that those were a lot of questions, but really there's so much that we can talk about. So where are we today? Let's talk about it from a medical standpoint.
Yeah. I know you'll have plenty to say. And before we get into that, I want to mention that the medicalization of hypermobility by the eugenics and genetics movement is really different than access to medical care, which is life-saving, quality of life-saving, a human right for people experiencing these disabilities. So we often run into people maybe who are working more from the social model of disability, like, why are you even working with medicine? And the reason is that it's a care access need. It's a disability access need for this population. And because of the history of eugenics, the erasure of the commonness of this, how people are gaslit, what certain researchers call abusive psychiatrization, people getting psychiatric diagnoses instead of acknowledgement, other physical systems, we find ourselves in a really violent place.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because the founding father of medical genetics was the person who discovered these initial point mutations. He became very, very famous. The person who developed the way that physical hypermobility in joints is measured, it's called the Baton score, named after a guy, his last name is Baton. He was also he's still alive, as a geneticist as well. And he really developed the nosology of hypermobility, or, how it's kind of measured. And it's very exclusionary. And these people both got extremely famous and did a lot for maybe some other people, but really left out the most common type, because in genetics, there's this point of view that we have to narrow down the pool. We have to narrow down the pool to be able to find what this gene is. And we think that inherited hypermobility actually has to do with a mosaic of genes. It's not something that's clear cut. It's part of, quote unquote, normal variation in a lot of ways. And the medical system really views, well, there's a lot of pieces to this. There's the whole idea that, if you could physically do something, if I force you to do something, then that means you can do it. The medical system really focuses on that in rehabilitation. If, it injures you, they don't really talk about that or consider it. They think, you're just not doing it right, especially in physical therapy. But hypermobile conditions are really not taught in medical school. Connective tissue generally is pretty left out of medicine. I would say that within each specialty field of medicine, like a lot of where the questions lie are in connective tissue. And that's just not something that's considered. It's very complex. And the way that medicine was separated into specialties really made that erasure more possible. There are very few diagnosing physicians. The medical and research landscape is all political because, the beginning of hypermobile discussion in medicine was through this very, famous kind of genetic uprising of these very powerful individuals. So the people who are most respected are coming from that same lineage of, the people who really erased the commonality of hypermobility. And now it's starting to finally be recognized as more common and not rare. It impacts, people assigned female at birth more. It's twice as common in people of color. It's more common in trans and gender nonconforming communities. It's more common in neurodivergent people. So those aren't people that medicine really supports, right? So that's a factor. And then there's a whole misunderstanding of connective tissue and what can happen. And so people are mistreated. They're told that because their MRI doesn't show, what they would consider extreme damage, as if someone got in a car accident.
I'm thinking in my head, the no pain, no gain slogan that everyone hears as whether you're growing up, whether it's in sports or for physical therapy. I'm thinking after injury and, you're getting pushed to get better. There's this whole idea of no pain, no gain, where someone who has connective tissue, I don't even want to say issues. If there is an issue with connective tissue, there's going to be pain. And so the continuation of pain is certainly not something that we should be encouraged to seek out. In fact, we should be going in the opposite direction. So I am very much interested in where you're bringing this conversation to, because really, again, whether we're talking about the aesthetics, we're still talking about the social and cultural ideals around hypermobility, and then how the effect and affect of pushing beyond is just a theme that's going to continue to be seen while you're experiencing something. So talk a little bit more about that and how our medical system, and I will say, Ella, was such a great distinction between medical care and the medical neglect, that they're not interchangeable. We're talking about two different systems. So thank you for that clarification as well. So please, Audre, continue.
I know. And that's the hard part
that's the hard part. It's been intentionally hidden from us, from our perspective. And this is part of the problem with an entire society being built on certain values: eugenics, capitalism, colonialism, white supremacy. You get into this situation where, yes, you have compounding biases preventing hypermobile folks from getting the care they need. You have what people might, or charities might, consider solutions, like just building awareness for this, opening what they call centers of excellence that are actually committing enormous human rights violations and risking people's death and livelihood.
Can I interject with something? Yeah. I mean, and that's happening because there are people who recognize that this field is about to explode, because there are so many people who are talking about this. There's language that's finally being developed within communities to experience this. And, physicians buy their way in. They figure out, maybe I could start treating these people, or maybe I already see some. And, this is a way to have a 2 or 3 year waiting list and to really establish yourself within a subspecialty where you can become an authority on something. And so people take advantage of that all the time, and not just physicians or clinicians within the medical system and alternative care systems, but also hypermobile people, ourselves. Like, I think there's this kind of, there is such a lack of quote unquote awareness or knowledge or conversation about this, that I can now be the representative, and my experience is the one that's going to lead the way for everyone. And the reality is, this affects so many people with so many varied experiences and needs, that what that does is then it creates the singular narrative based on people who have access to care about what this looks like, how this is experienced. And then the people who cannot meet those kind of, I can push through this in a way to where I can meet these standards or whatever. If they can't meet those bars, then, oh, you must have something else, or we're just not going to provide you anything because you're not doing enough.
Yeah. And that's really the problem, is that it needs to be anti-ableist. It needs to be disability justice informed. It needs to be acknowledging eugenics as the basis for these systems, for it to actually provide resources to the people who are most impacted. And the demographics we shared, are those the folks making leadership decisions? No, it is white, wealthy, I'm using finger quotes, experts and Instagram influencers who are really controlling that narrative. And a big part of what we're trying to do and the movement that we're trying to build is for disabled hypermobile people who are committed to other disabled hypermobile people, to other disabled people who are building these cross-movement connections and really thinking about justice across all levels of systems for care to change. Like, it has to be not only patient-led, but disabled patient-led, as long as medical experts who are working from that eugenic lineage are making decisions for the people, we're going to be in this situation. So that's why we develop a lot of different things, from anti-ableist, disability justice, value-informed touch therapies we've developed to working towards opening a patient-run clinic.
And many things in between.
And many things in between. Just like approaching it from all angles with those values, with commitment to the people in the community.
So this creates another conundrum for you both with Hyp-ACCESS, right? So my question is, with all the work that really needs to be done, because simultaneously, right, awareness has to happen. There's like the lack of awareness, the lack of even access to awareness, or to the idea that these questions could or would be asked, or that there are even questions to be asked, right? And that sounds like it's really rolling it really far back, but really, I think of, you have a child or a sister or someone in your family, or even someone that you know in school who is exhibiting these behaviors, right? And I don't even want to say abilities, exhibiting these behaviors. And is there even an awareness to say, hey, could that possibly be not good for you? Could there be something else going on? So not even knowing that those questions could or should be asked is, an awareness issue in and of itself. So you have the foundational issues of awareness, access to awareness to even know that there is a thing to be aware of. And we're starting from the place of all the things that you didn't even know that you didn't know. And we're talking about where you are and what you're doing. Are you seeing, or have you connected with anyone else, whether it's within the state or the country or any other country that is doing similar work? Because it feels very much like you're pioneering a movement that you are building, not just from the ground up, but literally like piece by piece, stone by stone. So foundationally, you are building on your own. And if you have made other contacts, we'd love to know about that. And also, what can our audience do to be helpful and learn more about this?
It is a lot of conundrums that we work with every day.
A lot of conundrums. We are up against such a powerful establishment that does not share our values. When it comes to people we work with who are working towards similar types of care justice, definitely want to give a shout out to Health Justice Commons. We really align with their work, disability justice movement broadly, and not just what we're seeing these days where they tack on justice when they really mean just basic accessibility or, diversity, equity, and inclusion, but the actual disability justice movement with specific leadership. Go ahead.
Well, so I don't think there are any other organizations that are doing what we're doing. I think there are a lot of people who are maybe realizing that they relate to these experiences. And there are patterns of, behavior that emerge from that, including like taking authority or, not quite understanding positionality, especially kind of within the communities impacted, and really taking that into consideration. But it's hard because there are only two of us. we dream of having many more people working with us and working towards similar things. I think if people are listening to this or, finding this information and it really resonates and you want to work with us, like we'd love to work with you. We'd love to kind of figure out ways to grow networks of support, because that's something that we really do, especially in New York City, is just figure out like, where can people go, where it's safe, and how do we communicate that, et cetera. But I think just starting like to understand what we've been talking about, like how these things really go up against each other and how hypermobility is really idealized. And at the same time, it's really harmful and impacting people and not getting care. Like that takes a while to process. So I think it's important for people to take that time to process that, because without understanding that, it's hard to navigate and recognize all of the pieces that are contributing to it.
Yeah. Like when it comes to helping the movement, and the community movement is growing. There are a lot of individuals, but when it comes to something more comprehensive, I mean, we're really, really happy to be partnering with DRNY and, hopefully getting hypermobility more recognized as a disability. But for folks who are newer to this, I think taking that self-reflection time is really the first step. Learning more, we're definitely going to provide more resources through this. We have a lot of them. And like you asked the question about if you notice someone in your life exhibiting hypermobility, what do you do? This is a really tricky ethical thing where like you don't want to come up to someone and define their experience. I think what we often tell people is that if they come to you and they're experiencing things, to really validate that and connect them to resources as appropriate. That's a very complex issue, but I think starting with yourself is paramount. And then starting with community, because I think a lot of what we see, people get really enthusiastic, they learn a lot of things, and then they move really fast. Then, like Audre was saying, themselves being an authority and not maybe considering the entire community, not even knowing about the entire community, knowing about demographics, knowing about the history. That is so essential to actually making change, because awareness without awareness that these systems are built on oppression will actually do nothing for the most impacted people. So the awareness of hypermobile disability has to come with acknowledging that the systems in our country, in our
globe, on our globe,
and the kind of colonially empowered leadership of certain countries, that's never going to lend itself to the full disability liberation, collective liberation that disability justice demands. So awareness of hypermobility is not actually going to bring about hypermobile care justice. It has to happen simultaneously with systems change, with questioning things, with building models that are completely different than what we have now.
And I think with the, quote unquote field of hypermobility, or, the massive community of hypermobile people, whether they know that or not, like we have an opportunity to shift systems. Like we really have an opportunity here, because there isn't information that's really codified. There isn't really a way that it's taught. There isn't really a way that it's talked about. There isn't, there's just not a whole lot of anything. So we have a large enough population of people to where we could actually make different decisions and implement them, and still it would be profitable, from that capitalist standpoint, which of course is what people are going to want to do anything about. Yeah. So
And then that could shift actual systems and how they function by showing how things can be done
differently.
Yeah. But I mean, when we're talking about people power, when you look at data that's actually done in a way we believe is more accurate, 1 in 5 people on a spectrum of this, that's 20% of the population. And we just try to repeat that as much as we can, because that means that when information about the history of this erasure and the current state of care neglect starts to reach people, the potential for people power and pressure on systems can just not be understated. Overstated? Understated?
Overstated, I think.
Over. One of those.
Well, and to your point, this is a massive conversation when we're talking about the just sheer numbers and sheer volume of information. And, as we're getting ready to sign off, there's, I would love to have information that we can share with our audience on how to get a hold of you. If you want more information, we can put the information you're about to give in the description of the podcast. And, certainly coming back and, let's talk more about this, and let's isolate just one of these areas and talk about it more, because the work you're doing is so important. So thank you so much for sharing the work that you're doing. And thank you so much for doing the work that you're doing. And if our audience is interested in learning more about you, and certainly we hope that as many people can contact you and find out more about you, how can they do that?
Well, we have a website. It is www.hypacces.com, which is www.hyp-ACCESS.com. Our email is on that website. We also have social media linked to that website. Folks can reach out to us through social media, through email. If people need help finding clinicians and physicians and care, that's really what we specialize in. So please reach out to us if you're needing support.
Yes. And when it comes to just kind of general learning about these things, we have a pretty extensive resource catalog that is also linked on our site, and we can share in other ways if they're more accessible. And that's always growing. So we've got academic papers that we wrote. We've got presentations we've given. We've got lots of information about hypermobile disability and just all the dimensions of this.
Yeah. And we have information from a science standpoint. We have information from a somatic and alternative body-based therapy standpoint. We have information from a dance and performing arts standpoint and disability standpoint. So they're all connected, but they're very different worlds when we go and present in them, So another question I have, of course, I know we're going a little long, but I think this is important as well. I know you have all of the resources. Do you have an area, or do you have a list of, if people want to become involved, what do you need as an organization? What are you looking for? And I know that's a big question, and there's probably a long list. Maybe that's our next topic, but even if there's a way people on the website can find out, things that you need, just a snippet of that would be great.
We're two disabled people working for a really enormous community. We could do so many amazing things for that community.
We plan on opening a clinic in New York City. We have community members who are starting to work with us. We would, if we, get the funding, love to bring people on more full time in terms of content creation, translating the work that we've done into more accessible pieces of information online and social media. We are a nonprofit, and we are, building that. So if people have consulting ideas or support that they can offer, that's something we're really learning right now.
Yeah, in general, we're always interested in collaborators, especially folks who are working in disability justice. and eventually, medical coding, Medicaid policy, all these different kinds of complicated things.
Medical software. We'd love to talk to some coders.
But in general, we just need the resources to keep this going and build it to the global movement that it needs to be.
All right. Well, I appreciate you taking a little bit longer of a time with us today, and I look forward to talking to both of you again. And we will put all of that information in the description of the podcast. Thank you so much, both of you.
Amazing.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. We
really appreciate it.
Empire State of Rights Closed Captioned has been brought to you by Disability Rights New York, your source for disability rights and advocacy. If you enjoyed our program, make sure to subscribe, like, and share this post. If there is a subject you would like us to discuss, please email podcast@drny.org or comment below. Tune in next Wednesday, where we'll bring you more information on disability rights in the state of New York. The closed captioned and ASL version of this podcast is available on our YouTube channel. To listen to more Empire State of Rights closed captioned, follow us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify.